Will the Supreme Court destroy the U.S. economy and your treasuries? Hello, Diamond NestEgg members, Super Savers, and course fans. I hope you're healthy and well. So, there are two cases heading to the Supreme Court that are making some of our regulars here on both sides of the political spectrum a bit nervous about the future of the economy and U.S. Treasuries. The first case is about the legality of President Trump's tariffs. According to President Trump, if the Supreme Court were to force him to remove the reciprocal tariffs he announced in early April on Liberation Day, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us, the United States, financially weak. And the second decision potentially heading to the Supreme Court is about the Federal Reserve. From the New York Times, President Trump's effort to oust the Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook, has kicked off a landmark legal battle, one that will have far-reaching consequences for the institution's independence. But is the Lisa Cook matter really about Fed independence? What's actually going on, and how might this impact our country's finances, as well as the T-bills, notes, and bonds that so many of us on this channel hold in our portfolios? Well, let's do what we always do here, Diamond NestEgg, and take a look at the facts before jumping to conclusions. Here are the three topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. Will the Supreme Court destroy or save the U.S. economy and your treasuries? 2. Which treasuries rose the most and which ones fell this past week? And 3. What are the predicted yields for the upcoming week's treasury auctions? As usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Will the Supreme Court destroy or save the U.S. economy and your treasuries? So, the facts behind this week's headlines, starting with Friday's court decision that declared some of President Trump's tariffs invalid. And for this, we need a bit of background first. The U.S. Constitution in Article 1 says that Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Over the past few decades, however, Congress has passed numerous laws that delegate the power to impose tariffs on imports from other countries to the president under certain conditions. And recent presidents from Clinton and both Bushes to Obama and Biden have used these laws liberally to impose various tariffs, usually to protect an American industry under pressure from cheap imports and or in the context of a trade dispute with a foreign country. President Trump, so far, has not been different in this respect. And instead of asking Congress to pass a new law, he has been using some of the existing laws that presidents before him have relied upon and which give the administration permission to impose tariffs directly. Two of President Trump's most significant tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs against Mexico, Canada, and China, as well as the global reciprocal tariffs that were announced on April 2nd, are based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, that provides the president broad authority to regulate a variety of economic transactions following a declaration of national emergency. And that's what this case is all about, not the fundamental question of whether we should have these tariffs or not, but the more narrow and procedural question of whether President Trump was allowed to impose the far-reaching fentanyl and reciprocal tariffs based on his powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. And when a variety of parties, including many Democrat-governed states, started suing the administration to stop these tariffs, both the lower courts that have issued their decisions so far, first the United States Court of International Trade, and now the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, felt that the law that President Trump used was not the right one to impose sweeping tariffs. As the Court of Appeals wrote, since IEEPA was promulgated, passed almost 50 years ago, past presidents have invoked IEEPA frequently, but not once before has a president asserted his authority under IEEPA to impose tariffs on imports. Rather, presidents have typically invoked IEEPA to restrict financial transactions with specific countries or entities. It's important to note that the Court of Appeals did not declare the tariffs invalid right away, but left them in place for now to give the administration until October 14th to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's probably not out of this world to assume that the administration will appeal. And if they do so, the current tariffs will probably stay in place until the Supreme Court makes the final decision. And even if the Supreme Court does not side with the administration, President Trump would still have several options to get the same tariffs passed again. Remember, the Court of Appeals did not say that the tariffs were illegal in principle. They were just saying that IEEPA was the wrong law for imposing them. President Trump could try to use a delegation clause from another existing law to impose the tariffs. Or he could ask Congress to pass a new law specifically for this case. However, both these options would be a bit more cumbersome and require more work and effort on the part of the administration, especially if they need to convince Congress to pass a new law. So let's wait and see how these could play out, if it came to that. What's clear is that this is a high-stakes legal battle. As we discussed a few weeks back in this video on our growing budget deficit, both President Trump and Treasury Secretary Bessent have stated that tariffs will be a key source of revenue for our country to reduce the deficit and keep paying Treasury holders. The Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, or CRFB, issued an update on August 22nd saying that the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, estimated recent tariffs would generate $4 trillion of total deficit reduction from 2025 through 2035. Now, given the size of our deficit, this alone would not be enough to balance the budget. As the CRFB says, incorporating these figures would slightly but not meaningfully reduce our deficit and debt projections. But for Treasury holders and those who are concerned about our growing mountain of debt, having $4 trillion in tariff revenues over the next 10 years is probably still preferable to not having this extra revenue at all and needing to raise this cash from even more government debt issuance. Now, let's move on to the second case that seems to be headed to the Supreme Court and that may impact our treasuries as well: the firing of Lisa Cook as a Fed governor, a member of the board of the Federal Reserve. And let's start with the background here as well. As we discussed in this recent video on the Fed's independence, link below for reference, the Federal Reserve Act says that each member of the Fed board shall hold office for a term of 14 years from the expiration of the term of his predecessor, unless sooner removed for cause by the president. As far as we know, no president before Trump has ever tried to fire a Fed governor for cause, and the term removed for cause is not well defined, but it is generally understood to mean a Fed governor has to have done something wrong in order to be fired before their 14-year term expires. And that's exactly what President Trump said when he fired Lisa Cook last week, that she lied on her applications for 2 mortgages that she took out in 2021. If this was done knowingly, with the intent to get a lower mortgage rate, this could be considered mortgage fraud, which is a federal crime, albeit one that doesn't seem to be prosecuted very often. Now, we can't judge the merits of the allegations here at Diamond Nest Egg, but even the Washington Post, which should be an unsuspecting witness in this case, say that the facts published so far raise some troubling questions. A public record search by Reuters appears to confirm that on June 18, 2021, Cook obtained a mortgage from a Michigan credit union for property in Washtenaw County, Michigan, which she said would be her primary residence. 2 weeks later, she obtained a mortgage from a different credit union for a condo in Atlanta, which she also said would be her primary residence. Obviously, she could not live in 2 places at once. And on Thursday, Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte raised questions about a 3rd mortgage for yet another condo that Lisa Cook took a mortgage out on. Cook entered a 15-year mortgage for a condominium in Cambridge, representing it as her second home. Only 8 months later, on December 1st, 2021, Cook signed an ethics form with the U.S. government that this property was an investment rental property, Pulte wrote. But in subsequent filings from 2022 to 2025, Cook consistently listed this property as an investment rental property, not a second home, he continued. But why would someone misclassify a property on their mortgage application, even though this is illegal? Now, you need to know that many banks and credit unions, based on their historical experience, assume that the closer a property is to your personal life, the more likely you are to do whatever you can in order not to miss a single payment and lose your home. This is why mortgages for primary residences may be easier to get and may carry lower interest rates than those for second homes. And mortgages for investment or rental properties may be the hardest to get and may charge the highest interest rates because you may carry the lease if you were to default and get it repossessed by the bank. In any case, Lisa Cook immediately sued President Trump to be reinstated as a Fed governor. She essentially argues that an unsubstantiated allegation about private mortgage applications submitted by Governor Cook prior to her Senate confirmation should not be considered a cause for firing, meaning that President Trump should only be able to fire her if the reasons for doing so were directly related to her duties as a governor of the board of the Federal Reserve. The allegations about the 3 condos and mortgages should not be enough to get her removed from office, even if proven true, as these were about private matters before she took office. So this case may not be just about the independence of the Fed, as some headlines would make you believe, but also about what standards we want to hold federal officials to in their private lives. Lisa Cook had her first hearing before a federal district judge on Friday, but it ended without ruling on Trump's firing of Fed Governor Cook. So at the time of this taping, it's not clear whether Lisa Cook is still in office or not, and whether she can continue to participate in meetings and vote on rate decisions. Curious minds want to know, though, do you think Lisa Cook should be voting on rate decisions in the September FOMC meeting? Or should she sit still while her complaint works its way through the courts? Drop a comment below and let me and the community know. In any event, this seems to be another case headed for the Supreme Court, which may have to weigh some difficult decisions here about the ethics required from one of the highest-ranking officials in the country in her private business dealings before taking office. And this decision could have significant implications for our treasuries and our money overall. In the event that President Trump would be able to appoint a new Fed governor to replace Lisa Cook, the likelihood of faster and steeper rate cuts may go up substantially, and while no one can predict for sure what the impact may be for longer-dated bond yields, inflation, and the overall economy, what we can say is that the recent volatility we've been experiencing in the bond market may not be ending anytime soon. And don't forget, if you want to take advantage of the current attractive bond rates before they potentially come down, there's still a few hours left to save on our bond courses. Prices won't be this low again. Use coupon code BONDS2025 to get an additional 10% off of our popular bond course bundle before midnight Eastern Time today, September 1st. The 10% coupon code BONDS2025 can also be used to purchase Bond Beginners or Bond Masters individually. Let's look now at where bond yields ended the week, keeping in mind that when markets closed on Friday for Labor Day weekend, only the allegations about Lisa Cook's possible mortgage fraud were known. We will need to wait until Tuesday to see how both bonds and equities will react to the ruling against the fentanyl and reciprocal tariffs. Which treasuries rose the most and which ones fell this past week? Here's our usual table with treasury yields from this past Friday versus the previous week. Here we have all the maturities that the Treasury issues at auction. Here's where yields stood this past Friday, and here's where yields stood at the end of the previous week. And here's the increase or decrease in rates over the past week. Increases in rates are shown in black, and decreases in rates are shown in red. The 20-year and 30-year were up slightly by 2 and 4 basis points respectively, while all the other maturities continue to trend further downwards this week. The yield on the 2-year fell the most by 9 basis points, followed by the 5-year at 8 basis points down. And without wanting to read too much into 1 week's worth of data, the yield curve seems to be steepening again, at least at the very extreme ends. The 30-year now pays 51 basis points more than the 1 month. This should come as no surprise given that the market expects a rate cut at the next FOMC meeting, the first rate cut since December last year, if it happens. According to the CME Fed Watch tool, the likelihood of a rate cut of 25 basis points in September is back up to above 86% from the mid-70s last week. And according to the Financial Times, the Federal Reserve's Christopher Waller even said that he could back a jumbo rate cut, a cut by 50 basis points, if the U.S. economy weakens sharply. The August jobs report that will be released this week will be a big influencing factor for this decision, as well as where short-term rates will go. Now, let's take a look at Treasury yields from this past Friday versus the beginning of the year. This row shows where rates ended this past Friday. This row shows where rates were on January 2nd of this year. And this row shows the increase or decrease in rates in 2025 so far. Again, increases in rates are shown in black and decreases in rates are shown in red. All maturities up to 10 years are down as the yield curve continues to steepen. The 20-year is unchanged, while the 30-year is up since the beginning of the year. As we've noted in previous videos, if you're thinking about locking in the current rates, you may want to go for the very long maturities. The 20-year and the 30-year show a substantial yield advantage over the 10-year of 63 basis points and 69 basis points, respectively. These are numbers that start adding up if you hold these bonds to maturity. You can find more details on these rates for any day of the week that the bond market is open on the Treasury's daily Treasury par yield curve rates page. All sources are linked below in the first pinned comment. Keep in mind that this overview gives you a general feeling for where rates currently stand along the maturity spectrum. The yields that you may get when you buy at a specific auction or from a specific broker, or when you sell, will likely differ a little bit from what's shown here. So, now that we know where Treasury yields ended the week, let's move on to the next section of today's video. What are the predicted yields for the upcoming week's Treasury auctions? If we go to Treasury Direct's upcoming auctions page, we can see that all the weekly T-bill auctions are happening as usual. The 52-week T-bill will also be auctioned off this week. Other than that, it's pretty quiet on the Treasury auction front, with no T-note, T-bond, or TIPS auctions on the schedule. At the time of this taping, on Fidelity's platform, here's where the expected yields stand for the T-bills that have been announced already. Please keep in mind that all of these numbers can and usually do change all the way up to the time of the auction. All right, Diamond NestEgg members, super savers, and course fans, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned something new. And remember, if you want to take advantage of the current attractive bond rates before they potentially come down, then check out this video here on our bond courses. There's still a few hours left to save. Prices won't be this low again. Use coupon code BONDS2025 to get an additional 10% off of our popular bond course bundle before midnight Eastern Time today, September 1st. The 10% coupon code BONDS2025 can also be used to purchase bond beginners or bond masters individually. I've linked all the details on our bond courses and our YouTube Super Saver membership below this video for your convenience. And see you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.